deep freeze. First of all, my vocal range is kind of Richard A. Clarke, the former, I forget his official title, but the guy that worked in the White House for years and years and years as a terrorism czar. Was off doing his own security consulting, etc., but is also on the board for an organization called Bit9, and gave a presentation, and the new acronym CHEW, which I thought was spectacular, was criminal hacktivism, espionage, and warfare. So we're going to talk about not necessarily everything on that list, but in relation to security economics, two of those primary points, the criminal and the espionage. We're going to kind of take a look at some of the history as well as some of the current trendings, and then I fully expect to, while I kind of present, what I kind of feel is a recommended strategy to kind of take on these current threats. My expectation is that there will be several people in the audience who are going to call me out and say that's completely wrong and you shouldn't be doing that. So let's begin. As you can see, the geek in me started a long time ago. For those of you who don't know me personally, I've been in the area for a couple of decades now, and in the security industry specifically for a couple of decades now. I started coming out of Case Western. I interned with a guy called Dr. Peter Tippett, and his company was called Certus International, and we were disassembling antivirus code and doing the whole antivirus application type work. He eventually sold that to Symantec, and Norton ended up kind of merging what we were doing at the time. So as from an early part of my career, having a mentor like him, obviously he went on to have CyberTrust and TrueSecure. CyberTrust is now the security arm of Verizon, etc. So that's kind of like my very early background. Just from an agenda perspective, and I apologize, this presentation is intended for me to have a little automatic thingy, so I got to stand back here and hit everything. So what have we seen over the last, let's call it, year and a half? Google, RSA, Epsilon, Oak Ridge Labs, Sony, HB Gary, PBS. That's a spectacular target, I thought, in terms of everything that when we are comparing against all the recent attacks. Stratford and what I didn't put on. What I didn't put on was this week's Zappos, which, by the way, if you're not familiar with Zappos, the 24 million records that were stolen from that retailer, they were PCI compliant, by the way. Just I want to make sure everybody understands that. We've got a lot of fancy names for a lot of these attacks: Aurora, Night Dragon, Shady Rat. But when you really come down to it, Brian Craig's in October kind of broke to a degree a set of statistics that were gathered by a number of network people across the country, where they found that over 760 organizations, international organizations, not just within the U.S., had matched the exact set of attack criteria and actual footprints that hit RSA, right? So 760 international organizations had the exact same attack thrown onto them, and 20% of those were Fortune 100. The majority of these organizations didn't know that they had these attacks happen to them until they were told by the people that did this research. So, there's a term that I'm going to talk about in a minute that is a gigantic buzzword, and I'll kind of debunk that as well. But while we get there, like I mentioned early here, our traditional attack incentives criminal, hacktivism, espionage, and warfare. Thank you, Dr. Clark. So, criminal, right? It's the easy mark. Here's our standard for-profit, stealing credit cards, stealing ID, personal identifier information, passwords, etc. Nothing new, right? I mean, granted, we are seeing, just because, we'll call it Moore's Law, and if anybody's a fan of the Metasploit project, HD Moore's Law, right? Just based on how fast technology grows, we're going to see a lot more of these types of attacks being successful. So, great. On the one hand, we've got, the for-profit criminal activity. And if anybody hasn't checked out datalosstv.org, it's a very interesting resource. They pretty much keep up as much as they can on the latest, the latest break-ins that are at least somehow, in some way, shape, or form, reported to the public. So the other half of this talk that I'm going to, that I'm giving as we speak is the espionage side of the house. National trade secrets, right? Source code. Here's what's really interesting, and from the perspective of traditional espionage, right? Or intellectual property or trade secrets, exactly. That's obviously happening. But what we are really also seeing today is project management techniques, sales methodologies, okay? There's all of these kind of associated things within organizations that are also being stolen as, as these attacks increase. And I'll kind of touch on it in a minute, but this is really affecting all of our organizations as a whole because there's one common thread, and that's innovation, right? So within espionage, we have nation state, we have our standard commercial industrial espionage. So let's talk about China. This quote back in October, Republican Mike Rogers: "I don't believe that there is a precedent in history for such a massive and sustained intelligence effort by a government to blatantly steal commercial data and intellectual property." So, that was during one of the House Select Committees on Intelligence. This quote I also like. It wasn't in direct response to the previous one, but the ministry spokesman, the Chinese ministry spokesman, blaming this, and this is actually in reference to, if I remember correctly, the Gmail attacks and the whole Aurora attacks as well. Blaming this on China is unacceptable. The accusation is completely unfounded and have ulterior motives. The poor grammar was intentional. That was a quote. So China has, and right now, yes, I'm picking on China for the moment. Because, well, let's be honest, they're the biggest one in the media, at least at this point. But there is clearly threat, a threat from this nation state, and whether it's government sponsored or not, still kind of up for debate. But that it exists. Okay. Does anybody recognize this piece of video? Show of hands. 1, 2 people. All right. This was in July. It was kind of discovered, maybe not discovered at that point, but it was brought to some of the industry's people in the industry's attention. And essentially, what it is on the People Liberation Army's actual website, they had this propaganda video where the gentleman right here is talking about their their university and their training and all of this stuff. And that homemade piece of software right there is an actual attack piece of software. Now, here we have on the one hand China saying, guess what? You guys are being totally unfair and we would never do any types of things like that. Well, this was the translation of that actual application that we just saw, right? and essentially target IP, right? And then there was a list of these IP addresses which were associated with this Falun Gong, which they're anti-socialist, kind of represent party that was kind of persecuted and expelled out of China. And then here's all the target listed in the tool related to these sites, but the IP address, and you got to choose what attack you wanted to use in that little tool that we just saw, but the IP address ended up being Birmingham University. Right, so there's a little bit of a communication gap here in terms of what we're saying. That video had since been removed from the People's Liberation Army propaganda site. Bottom line, right? Bottom line from here is that we have a just incredible amount right now of intellectual property trade secrets, and you're going to hear me say this throughout this talk, innovation that is being stolen not only from military and government, but corporate as well as university research, science areas. And so, how is this really happening? There was an interesting article that I read a few months ago about how the PLA, let me just kind of blow through this slide here, right? In 2006, this actually happened, and the source, it was Information Week. There was an article in Information Week, maybe so early to mid-summer, that kind of cited the whole history of how this happened, right? But the bottom line is, in 2006, in order to get into the actual market in China, Microsoft gave them the source code for their operating systems and their Office products, their Office suites, 2006, and then re-upped that in 2009 to include Windows 7 and 2008 server. Right. So, what I read a couple of weeks ago is that, not a couple. I'm sorry. The article that I then read in October was that you now have the PLA, and the PLA has on staff, not direct employees, but on essentially on staff on payroll, 150,000 plus consultants, right? And their job is to specifically comb through the miles and miles of source code of the Microsoft products, looking for things that can be exploited. Are there any Redditors in the house today? Anybody follow Reddit? Anything? Scumbag China has 150,000 consultants looking for Microsoft vulnerabilities. Contributes not one CVE. Does everybody know what CVE is? Common vulnerabilities and exposures. So you've got this army of consultants that are looking for vulnerabilities and not contributing a single one to the community. That tells a story, right? What happens normally, right? You've got either researchers or you've got people in the industry that are looking at their own code. I mean, Microsoft, I think, only employs 30,000 people, right? But typically, when either a black, gray, or white hat person finds some vulnerability, what's the process? You notify the vendor. You give them a little bit of time to see if they can come out with a patch, blah blah blah. And then you make it public, and it typically ends up in the CVE database or the NIST database or what have you. But that clearly isn't happening. Here's where it really kind of shot Microsoft in the foot. There are 40 million PCs sold in China in the year 2009, and less than 1% of Microsoft's revenue was coming from that country. So what they really wanted to happen was to have that market open up to them. When you think about places like China or the Indonesia, things of that nature, one of the first things that comes to my mind is walking around the streets and seeing all the pirated copies of, like, you know, movies, and well, it's the same thing with operating systems. You really think that the PLA is going to sell to its actual, and in working with a lot of international organizations, I have copies of the modified, you know, operating systems. So, you know, PLA is actually pirating these operating systems and doing whatever, embedding backdoors, things of that nature. It's that, you know, but it's that mentality of that country that, you know, the Great Firewall of China, we have to make sure that everybody is civil and blah, 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 that, you know, they're not going to buy it directly from Microsoft or any distributor. This is what had happened, and, you know, this is what had happened. So here's the buzzword of the day. Although I did actually, my new favorite buzzword is BYOWMD. The latest kind of vendor talk is on BYOD, bring your own device, right? And how can we manage all the identity issues with people bringing their iPads and iPhones and, you know, whatever onto you know, corporate networks. And I forget who said this, but it was on Twitter the other day. But the association is BYOD, really means BYOWMD, which is bring your own weapons of mobile destruction. That's my new favorite acronym. So advanced persistent threat, though, has been this year's big buzzword, right? Well, why? Okay. Here's my issue with this, and I know Dave has probably seen a number of, you know, people talk about, you know, this term. There's nothing advanced about this. Okay. We've seen all of this, and everything that is really contributing to all of the advanced persistent threat attacks that we've seen over the last year, 2 years, whatever, we've been yelling about for the last 10 years, right? Social engineering. You know, what's so new about a 0-day? Sure, each individual vulnerability can contribute, you know, can then yield a 0-day, but we've been trying to protect against it. You know, that's not a new concept. What's so new about SQL injection? Probably half of the, I would say, and don't quote me on this, but I would say that probably half of the attacks that, you know, occurred over the past year that were successful were either SQL injection or social engineering. If they weren't that, they were bad passwords. Bad passwords. How long have we been having? How long do we have to have this conversation about bad passwords? It's ridiculous. So, you know, advanced persistent threat. The only thing about advanced persistent threat the only advanced part about advanced persistent threat, in reality, in what we're seeing in today's trending, is very, very simply patience. Right? That's what is advanced about advanced persistent threat. You have a, you know, we'll say, you know, obviously there's different groupings of, quote, enemies, but you have an enemy that has the ability to, once a vector has been found, be really quiet and be really patient and not make a lot of noise and begin to have the ability, once that kind of foothold has been established, to now start to move laterally throughout the network. It's not advanced. That's just smart from an attacker's point of view, right? So this patience concept, right? The attackers really have the patience to do all of this, go through millions of lines of code, develop new exploits for all these things that they're discovering, develop these highly targeted spear phishing campaigns, and stay below the radar and move laterally. And the one thing, you know, that it all results in is the quiet exfiltration of our competitive advantage. And when I say competitive advantage, we, you know, since we're standing in this country, the we is the United States, but it's applicable to any other country, right? Our competitive advantage is our innovation, right? And things like the research, the sales playbooks, the project methodologies, the project management methodologies, on top of, obviously, the intellectual property, the trade secrets. all of that is accommodating, all of that combined is really all of our innovation, right? And it is silently being taken away out from under our nose. Patience is the one thing that we really don't have as a culture. We're no longer experts at, right? Instant gratification, SMS, and Twitter and all that stuff. We've completely lost touch with that, that element of patience, and that element of patience is clearly being taken advantage of by the people who are trying to gather and gain our innovation. William Hugh Murray, Lockheed, RSA, Sony, Oak Ridge all illustrate that the cost to launch successful attacks against the targets of choice has fallen dangerously low. Dave, H.D. Moore's Law. Can you give a brief description of what that is?
I have no idea.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right, so I think it was, it wasn't carnal ownage. I forget who exactly.
Chris Gates?
Was it Chris?
Well, Chris Gates is carnal ownage.
Right, no, but yeah, you're right, sorry. It's not Chris, carnal ownage, but it's somebody else. But it's basically, it was a blog essay on the fact that, like Moore's Law, the technology, whatever the curve is, that Metasploit and the advancement of the actual hacking tools technology is lowering the bar for advanced penetration testing.
Gotcha, I know what you were.
Okay?
Yeah. It was an article you wrote like 4 years ago, wasn't it?
No, this is very recent. So the concept obviously is, look, we've got all these great tools, and where it used to be that the script kiddies and all that was the barrier of entry to be serious and a successful penetration tester was very high. You needed to really understand exploitation and everything that goes with that. And the advancement of a lot of these tools is really kind of lowering that bar, where now we have schools and universities that are really kind of taking up a lot of this stuff and being very successful at it overseas. I talked about this, obviously, our competitive advantage, from a definition perspective. But what, and again, I'm trying to draw here is that all of that collectively is really representative by innovation, creativity, our curiosity. There was a Dow Chemical ad, and I loaded it up, so I'll play it when I'm done. It's like a 2-minute commercial. But it's one of those, the human element ads from Dow Chemical. But it really kind of brings the point home in terms of the curiosity, the innovation, the collaboration, the willing collaboration with, Shanghai and things of that nature. And it's just, I kind of look at it and I'm kind of mind blown to a degree, now, obviously. This competitive advantage, the inability to remain competitive, impacts every single person in this room, okay? But what it really means is that every single person in here who has any semblance of anybody in this room who has any semblance of accountability for the security of your organization's data and assets, you have a foot in the dance. You are involved and in a way responsible for our actual national economy, okay? And when I say that, we are long past the days of government intervention when we have threats to our industrial nation, okay? Every single organization is on their own. There's no oversight, there's no security standard for anything. all we really have, you know, are compliance things, and you know, like I said earlier, you know, Zappos was PCI compliant, and they just lost 24 million the other week. Everybody's on their own. And so that really brings home the fact that as a community, there's a really, really great need for, you know, events and organizations like this, that, you know, collaboration, the, you know, the peer groups, the sharing of information. This was released last week, the World Economic Forum Global Risks for 2012. Essentially, you know, what are the global risks that could potentially have massive, drastic consequences, and cyber attacks ended up number 4. I think terrorism was number 7 this year. You know, number 4 behind economic disparity, fiscal imbalances, and rise of greenhouse emissions, which I thought was pretty interesting. But I mean, there, you know, this kind of, you know, making the point here that this really, what we are all collectively involved in today, really has a gigantic potential to go south. And, you know, I don't expect it to, but there's a lot of people who, you know, these guys, and that, you know, these guys are coming out of Switzerland, and you know how neutral the Swiss are. You know, they did a lot of research. From a controls perspective, I would say that, you know, probably most people in this room would agree that it's cost prohibitive to protect against that low probability, high impact event, right? It's just not feasible from a business organization perspective. You can't be investing your security, your shrinking security dollar in things that, you know, just have a tiny, tiny probability of happening, but if they did, it's going to be the world, right? You need to really kind of rein your focus in and invest your security dollar in things that can have very good strides in protecting your people and your assets, and give you. I'm preaching. I'm sure I'm preaching to the crowd, right? Or am I? Am I wrong? There's, like I said, you know, this is open for debate. And please shoot me down if you know. Or not shoot me. You know what I'm saying. Yes, sir.
It depends on the event, right? There's things that you can do to protect against those low probability, high impact events, some of them. And there's other things that are cost prohibitive. But the fact of the matter is, in most cases, organizations consider security just as an expense, not as a competitive advantage.
Sure. Absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. Trying to map out what those events could be, I would say, you know, for most organizations, that's pretty infeasible. You can, you know, have your list of crazy catastrophic events to your business, and now, you know, take your blindfold and throw the dart and figure out which one of those really low probability, high impact events then you would really convince the business to invest in, you know, to invest in protecting against. So when the controls no longer become cost effective, you must react better and faster. People are going to do dumb stuff, right? People are going to click things. O-days are going to bypass standard security controls, and, you know, maybe not you, everybody in this room, because for the most part, I gather that we're all pretty much somewhat related in, you know, the security industry, but the collective, you being the human being, you continue to be the softest target. Ask Dave. Right? So in order to realistically, in my opinion, prepare yourself for this kind of changing threat scape, you really need to focus your security dollars on the things closest to you and your users, right? We're long past, again, the time where the concept of a network perimeter means anything, right? We're long past, obviously, I have another slide, but, your traditional security controls, your firewalls, your intrusion detection systems are not working to a degree. I mean, not even to a degree. These attacks are bypassing your standard security controls. So from a strategic perspective, you focus your dollars on essentially closer to the human, as close to the human as you possibly can. Richard Batelich, Mandiant CSO, tweeted this a few months ago now. Identity is your new corporate perimeter. Right? I don't have mine on me, but yeah, your iPads, your iPhones, things of that nature. And it's absolutely true, right? The whole concept now that, the new vendor architecture that everybody is touting now is the bring your own device initiative. How, like I kind of touched upon it, but how are we going to defend against, our executive council wanting to utilize their iPads on our corporate network? Well, up until now, I haven't allowed non-corporate assets to even touch my network. Now I'm being mandated or dictated that this actually happen, right? So, controls closest to your soft target, your awareness programs, identity control systems, and in my opinion, application whitelisting. So we've got basically, the human, as close to the human as possible, secure the human. Go out one step, identity. And then the next closest is the actual, host that person, your responsibility in terms of securing your users are their hosts. Security training, I'm not going to read this, but this came from the Microsoft Security Intelligence Report of 2011, stressing the need for security awareness programs. How many people in this room have SOX compliance issues? 1, 2, 3, a few. Okay. I'm not going to ask Dave because I already know his process and the programs in place. But when I say security awareness, I'm not talking about your SOX audit checkbox. Okay. I'm talking real security awareness. Is anybody familiar with the Securing the Human program, Lance Spitzner? It's a mini SANS course now. But securingthehuman.org is a fantastic resource for, a really, really stylized and effective security awareness program. Everything from your posters and monthly updates and different topics and, how do you get your users to, how do you incentivize your users not to click things and to understand what we're really talking about. Most of this stuff on a day, in any given conversation is going to go way over their heads and they don't care. Security is not a priority for the majority of the users in most companies. They have work to do, right? The next layer, and there's a lot of really slick things coming onto the market right now. I'm not going to go into specifics from a vendor perspective, but we're seeing now capabilities of identity at the packet layer, which is just sexy as hell. And from the perspective, when you consider a system where you now have the ability to, anytime somebody touches your network, gather their information credentials or authorization credentials, and begin mapping that per packet to resources that are business critical in your organization. That's just cool, and we'll see how it plays out. But if I can dynamically throughout my core network, if I see a packet and let's say I'm in the HR Active Directory group, and I try to access the accounting server on the fly, just based on the fact that I logged in and now every packet that I'm shooting out of this particular host is tagged with an ID that says I'm a member of the HR group and I try to go somewhere like the accounting server that I'm not supposed to go to, dynamically it's going to deny me. That's cool. So we'll see, you know, early technology, but I think it has some pretty high potential. And that next layer at the host layer, I'm a big proponent of whitelisting. And I'm sorry, Dave. And not Kennedy, but the one sitting next to you. But yeah, I'm getting there. I really am. I'm sorry. So whitelisting, right? You've got this concept of basically, if you're not on the list, you can't come in. Some of the, let me back up before you go into that. What's our traditional host-based control at this point, right? It's still antivirus. It's still your static signature, you know, in my opinion, useless piece of application that's a just gigantic waste of memory. So before Cisco mothballed it, they had this really interesting application that was just a bear to implement called CSA. The neat thing about CSA was that it was behavior, and it kind of knew what a keystroke logger looked like, and knew what a buffer overflow was, and you know, it would kind of say, hey, you match this bad behavior, I'm not going to allow that. And it wasn't implemented well very often, but when it does, it was really effective. Cisco killed it because it wasn't, you know, making money and whatnot, and it was just kind of a pain in the butt. But the opposite of that is this whitelisting concept, where instead of basically saying, oh, I've got this kind of concept of bad things and I'm not going to allow that to happen, I'm instead going to define what is good on my network and on my systems and only allow that, right? So where this becomes really, really effective is in enterprises that have really mature data classification and application approval mechanisms in place, right? So now you can take these systems and say, okay, you know, I need to allow all of the good applications so that my people have the ability to do their job, right, and not be prompted or not have things, you know, not run and not work. So I'm just going to point it to our installer directory, where all of our applications are stored that have already been approved for the corporation, for the business. And I'm just going to spider that entire thing and whammo. Now we've got a whitelist of everything that the business needs to run. And the result of that is, well, nothing else can run it. So you've got to, you know, you've made great strides in deflecting and you know, and preventing a lot of the malware that's out there. And I'm not going to say 100% because, you know, you know, memory injection and things of that nature could, you know, typically, yeah, smiling over there.
I don't ever touch disk anymore.
What'd you say?
I said I don't ever touch disk anymore.
Oh, I know. So, all right, anyway, enough of that. So, again, I said this before, but you know, the punchline is that you have any semblance of accountability for securing your organization, that you play a role in this whole concept of what I'm going to call security economics. All right. So, kind of in summary here before I wrap up, well, this is the wrap up, so I'm just going to lay this out, right? Bottom line here, motivated attackers are going to get into your network. Low probability, high impact is becoming fairly common high impact. The things that are being taken from our businesses are innovations and processes, things of that nature, and that is equivalent to our competitive advantages. Shrinking the competitive advantage that the U.S. has over other countries is kind of, you know, this concept of the enemy, their goal, right? It's so much easier to be able to go and either steal corporate secrets and begin manufacturing them maybe for less, than developing it on your own. Or it's even easier to just go buy that technology, right? That had probably been stolen in the first place. I believe it was First Solar, who is a solar cell manufacturer right outside of Toledo, that this past, oh boy, like a quarter ago, so a few months ago, reissued their earnings estimates because there was, and it was like it was hundreds of millions, like, and the reason that they didn't necessarily spill to the media, but there was enough people involved that, you know, kind of said it and whatnot. But the reason was, you know, they had a number of technology breaches and, you know, loss of some of that innovation. Costs to execute these attacks are low. In my opinion, you should be focusing your controls as close to the human as possible. So, having said that, all of this comes down to the advanced definition in all of this comes down to patience. So, any questions? Any comments? Any arguments? That's either good or bad. I didn't. No comments. All right. Well, this is my contact information. I'm also Twitter at RockieBrockway, no dot, if anybody's interested. Thank you very much.
Yeah, we're going to take a quick 10-minute break, and then we'll come back with the rest of the speakers. Just to let everybody know, if you go outside,